Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the 2025 Behavioral Health Crisis Continuum Forum. My name is Pete Eckart, and I'm the Information and Systems Coordinator at the Behavioral Health Crisis Hub of the University of Illinois Chicago's Jane Addams College of Social Work. If you joined us for day 1 of this 3-day forum, welcome back. And if this is your first day with us, we're excited to have you. Because we are virtual this year, we're still excited to keep you engaged over the next 3 hours with speakers and presentations about how we build resilience into services and systems in this evolving era of behavioral health. Before we go any further, I want to take this moment to thank our event sponsor, the Illinois Department of Human Services, and our event project manager, Sarah Rittner of SASU Project Management. I'm also and always grateful for the opportunity to introduce you to our fabulous Behavioral Health Crisis Hub team, as shown here on the pictures. Led by Drs. Creasy Finney-Hairston and Lori Rickman-Jones, this talented group of individuals have dedicated their time and effort to this event through content development, production, and session moderation. I'm grateful to be a part of this team. So before we jump in, a few housekeeping items for today's event. As on day 1, we are using the Zoom events platform. That's a lot like the Zoom that you're familiar with, a few extra bells and whistles. For example, you can access an agenda for today and all full speaker bios via the resources icon at the bottom of your screen. All participants will be muted and your video turned off, allowing you to focus on the presenters and slides throughout this morning's sessions. The exception will be during the breakout, when video will be on for all. You're welcome to use the chat feature to direct message any of the hosts or my hub colleague, Aaron Condon, with any specific tech-related issues. Here's an important bell and whistle for us. You're probably used to asking questions via chat, but we'd like to encourage you to use the Q&A icon that's available at the bottom of your screen instead. While we hope to have time to answer all of your questions live during the forum sessions, if you post your questions using that Q&A icon at the bottom, the speakers will be able to respond in written form if answering live is not possible. Also, and I'll return to this at the end, CEUs will be available for today's forum. We'll have instructions for that at the end of the virtual meeting. Lastly, we want to let you know that your experience today really matters to us, as it did for the first day and will be for the last. Please take a moment when we're done to complete the evaluation. You'll be receiving more information on how to participate during our wrap-up. So let's quickly look at our agenda for today. We're going to start with remarks and a personal story regarding the importance of resilience in the behavioral health landscape. Then we will move on to a deeply experienced panel on building community resilience from clinical, social, and spiritual perspectives. After a short break, we will listen to another personal account of a family story of navigating complex systems of care. And then we will invite you to participate in one of 3 breakout sessions. We will include topics on behavioral health and rural issues, children, and substance use disorders. You will have the opportunity to select one breakout to join live, though all of them will be recorded for viewing afterwards. And then we'll quickly wrap up at the end. So why are we devoting today to the topic of resilience? As we all know, resilience is the ability to adapt well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or any significant source of stress. It's not about avoiding the difficulties we encounter in life, but the capacity to bounce back from them. And I'm really pleased to introduce just the right person to set the tone for us on this topic. Our first speaker, Jessica Gimeno, has been a mental health policy analyst at Access Living since 2023. In this role, Ms. Gimeno has worked on advancing the implementation of the Community Emergency Services and Support Act, CESA. Jessica is the co-chair of the CESA Training and Education Subcommittee and also serves on the Illinois Mental Health Planning and Advisory Council. I'm grateful personally to know Jessica from her work with the CESA Subcommittee on Data and Systems Integration. Please join me in welcoming Jessica to the virtual stage.
Thank you, Peter. I appreciate that kind introduction. Good morning, everyone. So many of you may know me as the woman whose face you have seen on 200 Zoom meetings about CESA, or as Peter said, I've been attending as the mental health policy analyst. And I usually have one of my paintings of the Northern Lights as my background, which you could see on the next slide, because trust me, it is much better than looking at my bedroom or my kitchen. One of the great things about art is that it helps us express emotions when words are not enough, because some experiences in life, both good and bad ones, they transcend words. So the good news is we have art, but people often ask me, when did you start painting? And the truth is, I can't remember a time when art was not part of my life. I've been painting since I was a child. And, the next picture you could see, a picture of me. This is me in my 1989 New Kids on the Block nightgown. So my parents immigrated to the US before I was born, a few years before I was born. They had survived living through a dictatorship and they preferred living in a democracy. So I had a very happy childhood, and we had a close-knit family, lots of cousins, lots of aunts and uncles, and I always had friends. But despite this, there were these moments of profound emptiness or darkness growing up that I can only describe as flashes of gray in an otherwise cotton candy childhood. I had my first existential crisis when I was 8 years old. I remember I was in the second grade and we were going to school, and all of a sudden I thought, oh my gosh, what do we do? Do we just go to school and work and live 70 years and die? Like, that depressed me for some reason, but I didn't know the word depressing, so I didn't know that's what it was. And fortunately, through my childhood, these moments of darkness, they were few and far between. They were brief. Unfortunately, when I became a teenager, those moments turned into weeks and sometimes even months. And so I struggled with sporadic depression that was marked by crying spells, difficulty concentrating, and sometimes even suicidal thoughts. Then, as mysteriously as these episodes of depression came, they were replaced with periods of stability or genuine happiness. Sometimes I had highs where I had bursts of artistic creativity, and I could finish a painting that takes 4 weeks in just 4 hours. So, for many years, I experienced these alternating moods that I had no control over, that I had no words for. Then I had an epiphany when I was 18 years old, and I was a freshman in college. A friend with bipolar disorder died of suicide. So her death, it made me research this illness, and I realized I probably had bipolar disorder. It would explain my recurrent bouts of depression, my hypomania, insomnia, and everything just started to click. So I went to the campus mental health center where the doctor diagnosed me with bipolar 2, and then I got a second opinion, which confirmed the diagnosis. So getting a diagnosis, for me, that was liberating because for years I'd been fighting this nameless, faceless enemy. With therapy and medication, I got much better. I graduated from Northwestern University, cum laude, with a BS in communications. You could see my graduation picture in the next slide, and a second major in political science. I competed for Northwestern speech team and won 20 titles. I was a state champion and national semifinalist in impromptu speaking. Unfortunately, bipolar disorder was not my only foe. When I was 24 years old, this neuromuscular autoimmune disease that I had never heard of before, myasthenia gravis, entered my life. And I can still remember my first episode like it was yesterday. I was climbing up this long flight of stairs at work. It was a sunny morning, and then all of a sudden, I could not feel anything below my waist. So I started falling, and I kept falling and falling. I could hear my high heels tumble down the stairs. At first, I thought, oh no, I was like, wait, where are my quadriceps? I know I brought them with me when I left the house this morning. But as I lay there, my mind was screaming, get up, but my body couldn't move. And soon after that, I was diagnosed and hospitalized in critical condition with myasthenia gravis. The doctors gave me a 50-50 shot of living, and that was over 16 years ago. So today I use a cane every day because of the myasthenia. It's a disease that impacts a person's ability to walk, talk, eat, breathe, all of those involuntary functions that we take for granted. And so, like most people who have an autoimmune condition, I have more than one. In fact, I have a handful of chronic conditions. Um, People often ask me what it is like to live with 5 illnesses, and I tell them the truth. So, on the next slide, I tell them the truth, and that is that I see myself as Rocky, and I see all of my illnesses as Rocky's different opponents. So the bipolar disorder is Apollo Creed because it taught me how to fight. And the myasthenia gravis is Mason Dixon because it makes me very tired. And the endometriosis is Ivan Drago because it's very painful. And then I see the asthma and psoriasis as Clubber Lang and Tommy Gunn. So every day I wake up in pain, and when I wake up, I play Eye of the Tiger. I put on my Rocky boxing gloves, and I pray for strength to get through another day. Since 2012, I have been writing and vlogging about mental health and chronic health on my website, Fashionably Ill. Fashionably Ill is about surviving pain with style and humor. I write about serious topics and funny topics. Some of my most popular articles are how to exercise when you are depressed, 5 reasons people abandon a sick friend, how to get stuff done when you are depressed. And like I said, I also write about funny things. So I once wrote this 2-part article on how to vacationize your hospital visit or stay if you spend too much time in the hospital. So in this picture, I'm wearing a lei around my neck. I have a flower in my hair. And I also recommend putting an umbrella in your drink and SPF on your nose. In addition to Fashionably Ill, I went back to school after many years. In 2022, I graduated with a Master of Public Policy and Administration from Northwestern. I won a full scholarship to University of California, Berkeley. So I'm about to start my last semester at UC Berkeley, where I'm earning a post-baccalaureate certificate in counseling and psychology. Obviously, juggling a full-time job with frequent medical appointments and school is not easy. Every day I proactively use coping mechanisms for my mental health. So one of the things I talk about a lot is knowing your top 10. What is your top 10 or your top 5? So I even did a video of this on my YouTube channel. What are your top 10? It's easy to search if you search my name, Jessica Gimeno. So your top 10, these are the top 10 activities that work for you. They're positive coping mechanisms that help you feel better. So how did I find my top 10? Well, I use this app for mood disorders called Dailyo. How does Dailyo work? So you log your daily moods using Dailyo's ranking system by emojis and colors. You rank how you're feeling, and then you also log the activities you did that day. And then Dailyo uses months and months of data to tell you what activities you did on the days that you felt best. And equally important, Dailyo also tells you what activities you did on the days you felt worse. So for example, art is one of my top 10s. So this next painting, I made this painting during a time of great loss and grief. This painting shows the sun breaking through the darkness. To me, the image symbolizes faith, resilience, perseverance. Painting, however, the only downside is that it is a big time commitment. So thankfully, I have other coping mechanisms besides art. So based on Dalio statistics, they showed me 6 months of statistics, and my top 5 coping mechanisms are, I discovered this, number one, light therapy. So I do light therapy every morning. And, a light box, it emits light that is closer to natural sunlight than indoor lighting. Second, I listen to a lot of Black gospel music. Third, exercise is very important. Fourth, I watch daytime soaps. I watch Days of Our Lives over breakfast. And then at night, I catch up on Beyond the Gates. It's a new soap that debuted on CBS a couple months ago. And then fifth, and finally, boxing inspires me, or more specifically, select fighters inspire me as an historian of the sport. Resilience is something that we do on an individual level and on a community level. And that is why events like this forum are so important. So let's stay connected. As you can see on the final slide, there's my contact info. And on Access Living's website, we have a growing hub of resources on best practices in crisis response. So one of my favorites is Dr. Margie Balfour's Roadmap to the Ideal Crisis System. Dr. Balfour spoke at last year's forum, and you can also attend Access Living CESA Coalition meetings. These are very informal. I chair them the second Wednesday of the month on Zoom. So thank you all for listening to my story. In a world where people with mental health conditions are often treated as unreliable narrators, it's very important that we listen to each other's stories. As Nanette Larson reminded us last week, people with mental health conditions are people with lived expertise. Access Living's ethos is nothing about us without us. So to conclude, I want to say that I know that these are challenging times filled with uncertainty and anxiety, but despite these threats to substance use and mental health programs, I also know that if we persevere and stick together, we can build a resilient crisis system here in Illinois. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. You are incredible. Your story is incredible. I'm downloading Dalio today. What incredible tips you offered all of us. And again, thank you so much for being with us and starting to frame this conversation that we're going to have about resilience. Audience, we gather at a time when the foundations of our communities feel tested, when individuals, families, and entire communities are bearing the weight of fear and uncertainty. Some among us are being targeted for deportation, breaking up families and leaving those behind traumatized. Children going to school fearing that their parents may not be home when they return, and many don't feel safe going to work or even to their place of worship. Some have lost or fear losing rights that they've enjoyed for years, and yet others in less populated areas of our state and country are concerned about continued access to health care, questioning whether or not their local hospital may close or whether they can continue to afford their farms or businesses with the rising cost of supplies. Change is always difficult, and this is superimposed on many communities that remain riddled with violence, unemployment, rising costs for groceries, and so forth. This list can go on. We all know it well. Bottom line, trauma in our families is real and it's pervasive, and there's unfortunately likely more to be on the horizon. Now, we all have our political persuasions, and I do want to stay away from judging these events in this context. Obviously, we have our own personal views, but that's not my job today to pass judgment. So what I really want to do is for us to collectively accept the facts and understand the new realities that have been forced upon the people that we serve. Only then can we meet them where they are and offer them support, if not solace. And so in today's world, with today's challenges, how do we build resilience in our communities, enable them to withstand the challenges of the day? Are the tactics different now? Or what can we learn from our past that will help us today with creating healthier families and communities? Who are our partners in doing this work? These are some of the questions that we hope to tackle today. Maya Angelou once wrote, "You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise." These words weren't just poetry, they are prophecy. They speak to the indestructible spirit that runs through those who've endured slavery, segregation, targeted attacks, displacement, and more, and who, against all odds, keep rising. But this is the spirit in our communities. It's the spirit that's possible in our communities, but it must be cultivated, nurtured, and supported. Resilience is not just about surviving pain, as we could learn from Jessica. It's about transforming it. It's about how families become the first place we learn to heal, how communities become the ground where we plant justice and imagine something better. Today, we will explore what it means to develop that kind of resilience, not just in individuals, but in families and in communities, and not just to survive the crises of the day, but to reshape our futures. We have three powerful voices to shed additional light on this discussion, each with their own perspectives on how to build resilience through the clinical, social, and spiritual platforms. I'm deeply, deeply grateful to all of you. First, let's welcome Dr. Donell Barnett. Dr. Barnett is a counseling psychologist, the personal mission of improving communities. He currently serves as the Behavioral Health Advisor in the Division of Substance Use and Prevention and Recovery at the Illinois Department of Human Services. He's also past president of the Association of Black Psychologists. Next, we have Dr. Amy Yato, a community-engaged mixed methods researcher and seasoned licensed clinical social worker specializing in immigration trauma and immigrant refugee mental health. Dr. Yato is assistant professor at the University of Chicago Crown Family School of Social Work, Policy, and Practice. Welcome, Dr. Yato. And last but certainly not least, Chicago's own Reverend Dr. Michael Flager, senior pastor of the Faith Community of St. Sabina. At the age of 31, he became the youngest full pastor in the diocese when he was appointed pastor of St. Sabina Church. Senior Pastor Flager did a seminary internship at Chaplain, as a chaplain at Cook County Jail and at Precious Blood Catholic Church, both in Chicago. So again, thank you all for being here. And let me start with Dr. Barnett. So let us begin by doing some level setting on understanding what resilience is, all that it entails. Dr. Barnett, please educate us on the clinical aspects of resilience and how it's developed and so forth. Dr. Barnett.
All right. Thank you so much to this amazing team from Jane Addams, the Behavioral Health Crisis Hub, and UIC for organizing this forum and creating space for this discussion. I am Donell Barnett, and I am delighted to be in great company here with my co-panelists and our esteemed moderator and all the presenters throughout this series. I'm going to offer a few brief words to set the context and hopefully allow ample time for my brilliant co-presenters. All right. There are many people who go about their lives without formal intervention, yet they have found help and support from abuelas and pastors and coaches and uncles and pop-pops and teachers, and other people who stood in the gap, who kept us from going over the edge, who saw strength and growth and potential and endurance, who saw victory in us even when we could not see it in ourselves. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the critical role of people in our lives who instilled resilience and growth in us. The people in our lives who, without formal training, but through the sheer power of love, they saw us and they guided us to the other side of crisis. So, what is resilience? And I just want to highlight a few points, not do a whole review of the literature, but bouncing back after adversity is perhaps the more common way of describing resilience. When someone experiences calamity, the bouncing back concept asks the question, Did they return to their pre-crisis state, or is there a lasting negative impact? The bouncing back description is a useful way to describe resilience in everyday language, but from a research theory and practice standpoint, the bouncing back characterization, it misses a really essential element. And that is, did you learn and grow from adversity? For example, if a city goes through some natural disaster and rebuilds itself to its previous state without incorporating lessons learned or new infrastructure or improved practices, that would not be evidence of resilience. Likewise, if a family goes through a crisis and isn't stronger on the other side, then that family would be missing out on perhaps the most important part of resilience, because adversity ought to teach us some things. When you break resilience into its component parts, you find an interactive relationship between predisposition factors, or factors that you come to the crisis with, like personality traits or previous experiences. You have crisis factors, like the nature of the crisis. Is it sudden? Is it a shared experience? And then you have protective factors like resources or necessary lifelines that come to you during the crisis. And all of these things work in a dynamic and interactive way to shape both the negative consequences and the resilience itself. And it is that interaction that optimally leads to a better version of ourselves after the crisis. This is why it's challenging to find a widely accepted definition of resilience in both research and in common everyday language use. So, I want to highlight just a few overall themes that you see. Resilience starts with the ability to stay away from or avoid a crisis. Where possible, and emphasizing where possible, people who can identify stressors before they become a crisis and then make the necessary adjustments to either avoid or mitigate the impact of that crisis, that's resilience. Resilience is also characterized by the ability to overcome challenging situations. The aspect making it to the other side and to be relatively intact psychologically, emotionally, financially, or in other ways, we would characterize that as resilience. It is adapting to change, the ability to roll with and make necessary adjustments. People who can do that, or embrace the need to do that, we would characterize them as resilient. And finally, and perhaps most important, people, organizations, communities, cities, and environments that learn from these trying experiences and are in fact better because of the crisis are those we would also characterize as resilient. So I like to think about it as a flower blooming in rocky soil. This ability to grow in the face of adversity is perhaps the highest form of resilience. The concept of resilience is part of a constellation of concepts that, when you think about it, are really only about 30 to 40 years old. And my point here is that we still have a lot to learn. But you have the stress group that includes adverse childhood experiences and trauma and crisis and burnout. And all of these have touch points with resilience. You have a trauma related group that includes things like moral injury, secondary trauma, compassion fatigue. These concepts also touch on resilience, but they're more talked about in professional settings. And finally, you have a group of positive concepts like coping and grit and resourcefulness. These things that we hope are good attributes that come up during and after crisis. The point that I'm making here is that when thinking about resilience, there are many related concepts and language to draw on to help people understand and explain their experience and give them some goals to shoot towards. We should all be reminded that psychological resilience, that it fits into a much broader context as well. There are those who study how an environment can be resilient amidst a changing climate. how businesses can be resilient when staring down economic pressures, and how cities can be resilient in the face of economic, social, and environmental challenges. In all of these examples, we know some important things. One, resilience abounds in diversity. It is a strength. Resilience flourishes when you identify and leverage those strengths. And we know that social connectedness is critical to all of these. In short, resilience is all around us when we stop and take a look. Like a lot of research topics, the continuum of stress, crisis, trauma, and resilience, it also has its problems, especially when you put it into real world practice. As Dr. Jones mentioned in her opening comments, many people are facing extraordinary challenges that it's fair to say the textbooks on resilience struggle to keep up with. For example, when you think about we think about resilience as a post-crisis issue. But what happens when your world is filled with crisis? What happens when crisis has no end? What happens for people who are born in and raised in adverse situations and crises? What happens when crisis is part of a generational experience? Today, we as behavioral health providers and people who are in the business of helping others, we have to think about the new challenges that people are facing. Knowing that the government has put a target on your back because of who you are or who you love or where you come from, this is a different type of crisis, a different type of trauma that many people are not familiar with. What happens when the history and legacy of your people is under siege? When the systems and structures that provided solace to you are also at risk? What happens to a generation of children who bear witness to this without the meaning making ability to make sense of it all? Let me just say that while these are new challenges, they really are iterations of challenges that we have seen before. And as a community, we found ways to get to the other side and thrive. And so I'd like to conclude my topic here by calling out a few things that we don't typically talk about, but have been instrumental in helping us. Culture and history, community connections, spirit and faith, these are critical elements that have helped people be resilient in the face of adversity. These things may be considered non-traditional to those of us who do this professionally, but for many people, these are elements of their lives that are more traditional, that are perhaps more familiar than many formal interventions that we offer, particularly during a time of trouble. People should reflect on the storiedness of how your community made it over, whether it was through famine or political violence or systemic oppression in its various forms. Knowing that your culture and your community has a history of surviving, that is important to your survival. People should reflect on the connectedness that has been so instrumental, knowing that there are people and institutions and structures that will provide solace and shelter and support. That community connection has been a laboratory of resilience for many and will continue to do so. And finally, spiritness and faith, whether through organized religion or just a strong belief in the possibility of humanity, that kind of love, that kind of hope, that kind of courage, we can draw from spirit and faith, and it is indispensable to finding resilience and strength in times like these. I want to conclude with a quote that I find encouraging and that captures this message of the dynamic nature of crisis and resilience. We are troubled on every side, but we are not crushed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. We are persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. We have a treasure of life that surpasses any power that we come against. and drawing on that power, that life, we are resilient and we'll get to the other side. Thank you.
Wow, Dr. Barnett, that was awesome. Thank you so much. I feel like I can be resilient now. I had some doubts before. But we have our panel now with us. I'm so pleased that you set the stage for resilience in your comments, Dr. Barnett. But I think I want to start with understanding what we're seeing in our communities. I know that Pastor Flager is right there working on the south side of Chicago, and Dr. Yato has been doing work with immigrant communities. So let's kind of start with, what are you witnessing in terms of how our communities are experiencing stressors today? Father Flager, you've been in the good fight against violence in your community on the South Side for years, and well known for your activism against gun violence. But can you share insights about what you're seeing about, what our communities are actually facing? And then I want to move, after we kind of set the stage on what you're seeing, what can we be doing as helping professionals to, again, foster this resilience? So, Pastor, I'm so used to calling you Father Flager, but so forgive me if I slip.
Just call me anything at all. I'm fine. Thank you so much, Dr. Rickman and Dr. Barnett. That was amazing. Thank you so much. I got to have you come to the church and speak here. So appreciate you. First of all, what we're finding, I've lived in this building here for 50 years. And so what I have seen, though, in this last year and last couple of years is a tremendous amount of increase of hopelessness, where people are seeing there always was some glimmer of something that was going on in the government, something that was going on larger. But now there's an increase of hopelessness and also an increase of anger. Where they're feeling no longer, where they don't see something at the light at the end of the tunnel, where they don't see something happening. There's an anger of a feeling that the hopelessness has no response to it, nothing that can be done about it. The other thing I find here in communities like Auburn Gresham and Englewood and Lawndale and many others, that it's a community that lives in trauma. And because of the violence, because of the poverty, because of the neglect, it's a community of violence. Oftentimes when soldiers come back from war, they say they can't really help them heal until they get out of the war zone. Well, when you live in the war zone, and that isn't changing, it's very hard to have the healing and have it happen take place, because it's a consistent daily reality of the violence. When you can't go anywhere in your community without seeing some memorial of some person that was shot or killed there, to see a teddy bear here, to see balloons tied over here. When you face that day in and day out, when a child can't go to school without passing some memorials of a loss of a loved one, or go into school and remembering a locker of a child that was a friend of theirs, or a person that he used to sit with at the lunch table. So when you have a sense of a community of trauma, that adds to the hopelessness and to the anger. And then a sense of abandonment. And that seems to be growing. And there's always a sense here in 79th and in Auburn Gresham that you look around your neighborhood and community and realize an abandonment and neglect. But now, as you're seeing what's going on in government-wise, and more being cut, that you're seeing that there's less and less is going to be provided, and there's the worry of we've had so many mothers and fathers and grandmothers when they said, I don't know how I will survive. If Medicaid gets cut, I don't know how I will live. We run a food pantry, and we've seen that increase of people. We are now getting up to 700, 800 people a week that we're feeding. And we just met with the head of the Chicago Food Depository, who we realized starting July 1st, and when the Medicaid cuts go in, the numbers are going to increase of those coming to us, while the food is being decreased because of funding that is being cut. So we don't even know how we're going to meet those needs, those basic needs of just having food to eat. So that you see that getting worse and worse. So the sense of abandonment is a growing anxiety, if you will, of knowing what's going to happen tomorrow, what's going to happen next month. It's funny, I was talking to some of the young people who have gone to part of these trends downtown and asking someone, so what is it that draws you there? And it was very interesting. About 3 or 4 of them said to me, I just want to be in a different atmosphere. I don't want to be looking out and see abandoned buildings and see closed stores and see dirt on the streets. And I want to go in an atmosphere where I can look around, even if I don't have money to go to those places. The fact that I can sit there and look there and feel safer there and feel more alive there than I do when I go outside of my own neighborhood and look in my own neighborhood and outside of my own doors. So I think that we have to realize the trauma of a community that goes on to the abandonment and neglect, and that's growing. I think the increase of this is we haven't even begun to see how bad it's going to get in these next couple of months.
Yeah.
We've watched in our own office here the number of folks that are coming in angrier and coming in, and because of the condition of their life, and they can't necessarily express that on the street, so they'll come to places where they feel like they're safe, and that's where they express their anger, express their emotions. We've had several instances, more and more instances of mental health issues that come in here almost on a daily basis. Some very angry, some possibly could get violent, and they just don't know where to turn. And you don't want to call the police, and there's not always a self-help and self-care. And many of the hospitals no longer will even have them funding to take people in to help them with the mental health.
Yeah.
We have a free mental health counseling here that goes on 3 days a week, and we're booked over a month in advance of 3 full days in a week of free counseling.
Yeah.
Ran into another incident. Were you trying to say something, Doctor? Oh.
No, go ahead.
Okay. We had another incident just this past week, an immigrant family from Venezuela who had been part of our church for months when they first start coming here, and the bus is being brought up from Texas. And their 17-year-old son was shot and killed last Sunday. Not only they have no money, they don't even want to approach any funds because they don't want government to know where they're at, because they're living in such fear. And now they're talking about possibly having the memorial service at 1 or 2 in the morning, where they can get their family here because they're afraid of going out during the day and being followed by ICE. So. Yes. They're dealing with the loss of a 17-year-old, and the father said, the only reason I came to America was a better life for my son. Now my son's dead. I don't want to live anymore. Right. And the fear of possibly having this memorial service for your intimate family and friends that are here, 30, 40 people, at 1 or 2 in the morning here, because they're afraid to come out during the day of being captured and being sent back. So some of the things we've had to do here to cope with it.
Now, wait a minute. Before you talk about coping, I just want to hear from Dr. Hayata. Now, that was a great segue as you talked about the Venezuelan family, to hear from Dr. Hayata talk about her work in the immigrant communities and the migrant communities of recent, and what you have done. I know that you're a researcher, but I think that you've learned some things from working with these communities and understanding the kind of challenges they have. So let's segue to that. And then we're going to come back to talk about coping, Father Pfleger. Dr. Yato?
Yeah, thank you, Pastor Pfleger. The stories are powerful, and as I think about immigrant communities in our city, across the nation, there's such diversity in this group by nationality, by age, how long they've been in this country, by religion, and immigration status. And in this time, immigration status plays such an important role for new arrivals, for longstanding communities, because their status will dictate what privileges and rights are afforded to them, whether they have a pathway to citizenship and authorization to work, whether they can access healthcare and other social benefits. What I also want to say is, while there are these distinctions by immigration status, the anti-immigrant rhetoric, the threats of detention and deportation have left a chilling effect across all immigrant communities, irrespective of status, irrespective of whether they can lawfully stay here in the United States. Because the words that our leaders are using, they are communicating a sense of unwelcome. that you don't belong here, that you are not safe here. And people are making decisions based on what they feel will keep their family safe, what they feel will keep their family together. And we've seen these in the headlines. We see it in practice. It's showing up in the research. People who are avoiding medical care even though they really need it because they're afraid of being identified. Parents that are making the decision not to send their children to school, even the decision of whether or not to go to the grocery store. That when we think about stoking fear and creating these moments of uncertainty, this is not how you build a healthy society. Across sectors, we are seeing its effects, and we are seeing this in real time. At the same time as we talk about the effects, the threats against immigrant communities, I also want to remind everyone that immigrant communities are resilient and strong. Trauma and adversity may be part of their stories, but their trauma stories don't define them. And so as this convening is really about how do we think about building resilience and strengthen our communities, this is where I'm excited about where this conversation is going to go, because we know that stronger and resilient communities come from creating inclusive and supportive environments. When we can create spaces for people to share their worries and fears, when we can highlight their strengths, when we can connect them with the appropriate supports to help them heal from current, past trauma and the trauma to come, we are preparing communities for the uncertainty that is to come. But for our immigrant communities, there are very distinct and unique threats in this moment. And so it's important for us to hold all communities impacted by trauma, and particularly those that are new arrivals to our city and state.
So Dr. Barnett, do you have anything you want to add to this conversation? I know that your focus in your work is more statewide, so you may have some ideas about what's happening in other communities across the state and what we're seeing. And then I want to quickly move to the discussion of what we can do to help support these communities cope with these changes.
No, thank you. The only thing I'll add is that, as I was mentioning earlier, resilience operates in many different levels, and so as a broad system, it is um, building access points and entry points for people across, knowing that individuals and communities and families, we all do our own work in resilience and thriving, but as a system, sort of creating some infrastructure and opportunities for people to engage with structures and formal sources of help that can be lifelines for people as they are going about their journeys. And so I think that is a part of a broader task to build a resilience ecosystem for folks to thrive, no matter where that entry point may be.
Father Flager, you were going to start talking about what the church is doing to help these families cope. Can you share some of the strategies that you all are doing? Now, we've talked a lot about Dr. Barnett, it's mentioned, and Dr. Yato supported the concept of social connectedness. And I know that the community that you've built at St. Sabina is really a testimony to the importance of social connectedness and sense of family and sense of community and those bonds that help people deal with struggles. Can you share a little bit about how you foster the coping mechanisms?
Sure,
mechanisms of
certainly.
Your congregation?
Certainly. First of all, I want to just address something that Dr. Halada brought out, and I think it's so important. One of the responsibilities of us as institutions and as churches and faith communities is to address and expose something that Dr. Halada mentioned is that there is this, I think, a really concentrated effort to have us turn on each other and blame. If the immigrant wasn't here, you'd have jobs. If the immigrant wasn't here, you would have these programs. The immigrant wasn't here. There's always this sense to try to divide and blame one another. And so you have basically a lot of Black and brown communities fighting over each other over crumbs. And they take the emphasis and the focus off the real issue. And we turn, as has always been done through history, turn people against each other so that we cannot unite to fight for the real justice that needs to come to all people. So I think we have to continue to expose that so that we do not see the poor and the vulnerable turning on one another when in fact they're both struggling and suffering because of a hidden hand that's really pulling the strings. But here's one of the things we've done here in our employment center, our social service center, our youth center, and all the other outreach ministries we have, is wanting to have to train staff, have to train to deal with the public who are now very angry, who are very hopeless, how to support, how to face the emotional outbursts, and that is greeting them with a sense of love and of concern. And rather than try to meet them on the anger, to make sure you say to them, hey, are you okay? First thing to know, we care about you. The issue is the issue, and the need is the need. But first, we care about you, that you are important to us, that we value you as an individual. So when you come in, whether it's angry, whether it's in tears, whether it's just hopeless, whether it's suicidal, that the first thing our greeters, or if you will, be at each of the different organizations and outreaches here, is to make every person feel valued and feel respected. And sometimes it means not just saying, how can I help you, but first listening. What's going on with you? Now that's time consuming in a very busy office and lots of people coming in, but I find it absolutely essential in this time to say, hey, how can I help? What's going on? You're important to us. We care about you. We love you. Paying attention to their need rather than just solving it and moving on. And, we're treating people like numbers or like statistics, paying attention to them and support them, and providing services where we can and guiding to where we can't, but still letting them feel valued, listened to, respected, and understand their hurt and their pain, not trying to just ignore it or just tell them, you can't act like that here. That's not the way you handle people who are hurting. So first, I think how we greet people and how we care for folks and let them know that we value them when they first come in. I think the second thing is we try to do here is reconnecting folks. Folks are when you go into yourself, which happens a lot of time in pain, it's a rabbit hole you go down, and it only gets worse and worse and worse, and people go into their own little self cocoons. Is reconnecting people and constantly teaching and speaking about reconnecting with family, reconnecting with neighbors, reconnecting with children, building that relationship that used to be there that is not there now, and somehow feeling because of my situation, I cannot connect with anybody else. And I know nobody feels this pain except me. So rebuilding that sense of community, whether it's in a church, whether it's in a block, whether it's in your home, in your family, but sense of community. And even in the workplace, we try to teach here that in the workplace, you're not just people who happen to be all working there. You're a family in your own workplace. You see somebody coming into that job who looks like they're distressed, to take a moment when it's not public to say, hey, are you okay today? Are you all right today? Again, letting people know we care.
Yeah, Pastor, one
Pardon
of the things that I was earlier in my career a researcher at the Harvard School of Public Health, and we studied neighborhoods in Chicago. And one of the findings from that research was that they called it collective efficacy, that when communities had a sense of collective efficacy, they were stronger, they built healthier families, their children were better off. And that collective efficacy had everything to do with caring about one another, that Mrs. Jones cared about what Mrs. Bradford's kids were doing. And so that community that was connected through love, shared values, and concern for one another really created a network that was of bonds that were truly creating healthier communities. And it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, so that people have to understand that I'm not alone. I'm not alone. There are others. I have other people I can lean on, I can turn to, I can talk to, that I have connectedness with. So, never want anybody to feel they are all alone, because that when you go into that tunnel, that's very hard to dig back out of it. Secondly, is trying to help people rise up, find their voice, a sense of empowerment, that I have a voice, I have power within me. I may feel like I'm in this horrible situation, but I'm not powerless. I still have a voice. And how do I find my voice? And how do I unite then to fight back on these issues, to fight back on the neglect and on the abandonment? One of the things that's very important to us here is that we try to teach neighbors to say, we can control how that store treats you, or what kind of food is in that store. We can control what's going on in our neighborhood. So that sense of empowerment, that I have to find my voice and realize one of the things that helps me get through, like when all the parents in our organization here, Purpose Over Pain, while parents who have lost children to gun violence, is helping them come back together and say, okay, how do we fight together to save that? I could not save my child, but I can save another child. I can save other children in our block and in our neighborhood. Yeah. So a sense of purpose that allows me to rise up, find my voice, and fight back. I have to move from the mentality of a victim to a victorious person. I have a voice to use, and I have power within me, and I can tap into that and use that and change things. I think finally, go ahead.
That reframing is something that we even heard from Jessica, that she on a personal level had to reframe how she thought about her chronic illnesses, excuse me, and that she was rocky. And that, excuse me, she had power over her illnesses because she saw them as opponents that she was going to fight. I thought that was a really powerful story of personal resilience. And then you had your final thing, and then I would like to hear from Dr. Hayato talk about her work in immigrant communities. And Dr. Barnett, jump in anytime.
Yeah, I think that that's very important, that people move from a sense of powerlessness to power. I have an ability to fight back, to change things, that I am not simply a pawn to be moved around by the world, but I have an ability to take control of my life. And together we can take control of our neighborhood, our community, our city, our country. The final thing is tapping into our faith and spirituality that Dr. Barnett talked about. I think that is so important, no matter what your faith background as a Christian, Muslim, Jew, Sikh, Hindu, whatever, that there is something greater than me that I can lean on, find strength from, that there are things that me as an individual find ourselves going up against a wall, but my faith allows me to understand there is a God over all this, and a God who hears and sees and watches. There is a strength beyond me. And I have to tap into that strength in me. It's that faith that when everything looks hopeless, I still have hope. That when everything looks impossible, it's still possible. So I think it's tapping into that hope. And when we do that, I think then we also are able to put in perspective that whatever I'm going through right now, at the fact that it's a season, it's not an ending, it's a comma, it's not a period, that there is a shelf life to this issue. There's a shelf life to this problem. There's a termination date. This is not the end. This is a season. This is a time that I'm in, but there is something beyond that. And, from my Christian perspective, is I tell people all the time, I've read the end of the book. We win. Justice does win. Love does win. Peace does win. It's a marathon. It's not a little short down the block race. And that we have to be in this for the long term, and understanding that it's not some justice or love or peace or equality is not some pie in the sky. It is a reality that will win. And I do my part in this, taking my baton. I fight now, but I understand that there is a termination date on evil, on trauma, on pain, on injustice. And so it has a shelf life, and that there is a God who hears and a God who will respond.
Thank you, Father. Dr. Yato, I know of your work that you're doing in the immigrant communities. Can you share some of the things that you have learned and are able to do in terms of support? And then we had a comment in the chat about Jewish communities. I want to make sure that those speakers and those communities feel like they're a part of this conversation, because I think everything that we are talking about is relevant to those communities also.
Of course. Building on Pastor Flager's remarks, I do think that it highlights that we have a deep understanding. Human beings have a fundamental need to feel safe and secure. You know, whether you are a new arrival, whether you are a longstanding member of our community, feeling safe and secure is fundamental to our ability to function in our daily life. We can't live and be integrated into our communities without that. And we will individually and collectively struggle without that foundation. And so I do think that the new arrivals mission, the surges of asylum seeking migrants that started in August of 2022, through the Texas Operation Lone Star busing program that was mentioned, it provides a really great example of how a city needed to come together to help communities that were really experiencing mental distress. I think about the arrivals who, many of them, sometimes learned for the first time that they had shaky legal status, that they weren't authorized to work, that housing was going to be time limited. And so it really showcased where when you have that many people that are in distress, their experiences are parallel to so many community members we have here in Chicago, impacted by gun violence, by substance use. And so the learnings that we had gained in our initiative, and I'll share a little bit more about that, my hope is that it would be extended to other communities impacted by trauma. And so what did we do? When the buses began arriving, city and state leaders had asked members from the Coalition for Immigrant Mental Health that I chair, U Chicago Crown, my academic home, and Lurie Children's Hospital. What could we do to support the increasing distress? And the original model we had was get more therapists into these emergency locations. And we had asked, can we see what these emergency shelters look like? And very quickly we stepped into spaces where there were 500, 600 people, that we were strangers in these spaces. We didn't necessarily speak the language. And so we went back to think about, do we have a bilingual, bicultural mental health workforce to provide specialized individual care? And the answer is we don't. The pandemic highlighted that we just don't have enough resources nationally, not enough inpatient psych beds, and we shouldn't be waiting until people are in crisis. And so we asked the city and state, could we take a different approach, a public health approach to thinking about mental health care? Could we train the non-clinical frontline workers to be the first line of support for arrivals, really mimicking what Pastor Flager had shared? How do we train the receptionists, the case managers, even security around how to be a kind, compassionate, listening ear? We trained in that initiative, it was about 2.5 years, we trained 9 cohorts of frontline professionals, volunteers who were in police precincts, on how to validate and recognize stress responses. We trained them on mental health prevention strategies, mental health promotion strategies of how do you create spaces for connection, because we know what trauma does. Trauma broadly will disrupt your sense of safety. It disrupts our connection to other people. It minimizes our sense of agency. We forget all the things that we are able to do. And so through this initiative, we called it Reimagining Mental Health Supports for Migrant Arrivals. We wanted to give back to arrivals and frontline staff what we know trauma and stress takes away from them. And so in doing so, what we learned was that when you equip community members, when you equip people with knowledge about what stress and trauma looks like and how to respond, when you give them the tools to think about how do we care for ourselves, that self-care piece, so that we can hold others in this work, we actually create healthier communities. And the hope of this initiative, yes, we don't have any buses arriving from other states. We know that the immigration conversation continues to be pretty dynamic, complex. There is harm. We also know that we learned a lot about community, and that has been part of this panel. We're talking about how do we connect? How do we create safe spaces to talk about our worst fears? How do we help reframe the challenges? And how do we instill hope? I think that's part of the conversation that I know we're all going to hit as we continue the dialogue. Hope is essential for healing. Hope is empowerment. It allows us to see beyond. It allows us to see the end of the story, as Pastor Flaker had mentioned. And so in times of adversity, we need to have the tools to sustain ourselves, because we know that this won't end tomorrow. And I think what we learn is equip your workforce, create spaces for joy and worry, lean into the strengths, prepare ourselves for the unknown. And what you will see as a result is greater connections, greater investment in the people around you. And that's the opportunity to sustain ourselves with the uncertainty that's to come.
Thanks. Dr. Barnett, I think that we've got some comments from in the chat about the persecution of Jewish communities. Other communities could basically, mirror those comments. If what we're talking about today have relevance for all communities?
I would say it's a both and. There are do have to appreciate the unique experiences of different groups and different communities. That's very real. That's very present. It's palpable. It is also true that there are some experiences that are a little more broad and universal. And I think our task is to find space for both of those conversations in a way that is respectful, in a way that is caring, that is loving, that honors our uniqueness and diversity, but also centers our connectedness. And so, in response to your question, I think that that's the real task before us is how to do both and to a point that was mentioned earlier, there is a lot of effort to to keep us from doing that, to keep us focused on our own individual issues. And that's a part of the challenge that we have to overcome and really get to a point where we can see humanity, where we can see love, where we can see support across different groups, across different backgrounds, across different experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just comment on that, Doctor? I think what Doctor said, the connectedness is so important because evil is evil. And wickedness is wickedness, whether it's done against black or brown or white, whether it's Jew or Christian or Muslim. There is such an effort to keep us disconnected and make us pick sides. And we have to be focused on the evil, you have to pick a side. Either you're with Israel or you're with Gaza. Either you're with Russia or you're with Ukraine. No, we are connected. Wherever human life is at risk, wherever in the world and wherever in our neighborhood, wherever in our community, wherever in our country, we must not allow the forcing of picking of sides. We must pick on the side of justice and righteousness. And wherever that evil and wherever somebody is made a victim of and life is lost of, and I'm just one quick story. I was a woman back when Sandy Hook took place, and I was a march downtown against what happened at Sandy Hook and the murdering of the children. I was marching next to a white woman from the suburbs, and I was talking. I said, it's interesting to me. This is my first march. I said, with all the violence and the Black lives have been lost in Chicago, it's interesting to me. This is the first time you're fighting against violence. And she said, well, I saw those children at Sandy Hook, and she said, I saw my children. She says, to be honest with you, when I see children on the south side or the west side of Chicago being murdered, I don't identify with that. And to me, that is the greatest issue. We have to identify with someone in pain, someone who is being killed, someone who is being mistreated, whether it's in Gaza, whether it's in Israel, whether it's in Chicago, whether it's in LA, whether it's in New York, whether it's in Venezuela. We must keep connected as a human family and address and attack evil and not pick sides on what evil is the greatest or the less.
So, this is a question for any of the panelists. It sounds like, and we all agree, that this sense of social connectedness is key in terms of supporting the resilience in families and communities. You mentioned a lot of other things that I think were super important, with the sense of changing your narrative, reframing it so you're not feeling like the victim and feeling empowered. All of those are very important also, but I want to stick with this social connectedness point. Now, Father Flager, is that the role of all churches, you think? And if people aren't affiliated with this church, how do we build that social connectedness? Who are our partners in building that social connectedness across neighborhoods in our communities?
Well, I think the faith communities are extremely important because I think, be it the mosque or the synagogue or the church, we have to continue to preach and teach the importance of. We've suffered, I think, from a disconnectedness in America for some time. It's been growing, I think COVID put it on steroids because we were all actually even being told to stay away from each other, stay 6 feet from each other, don't talk to each other, don't shake hands, don't. So it went on steroids. But I think our job has to be the sense of rebuilding community. We've got to teach that from our pulpits and our podiums, and the importance of connectedness, the importance of sisterhood and brotherhood, of unity, of oneness, of connectedness, and then make our congregations to take that message out to their homes, their families, their blocks, their workplaces, the marketplace. So I think it is a tremendous responsibility for the faith communities to teach that, model it, and then send their members out to live it and challenge it wherever they are.
And are there other potential partners in this?
I think there has to be. I think everybody has to be a partner, and I think a disconnected world is a world doomed for failure. In business, in in academics, that we don't see that in a classroom. You have to start to be building the fact that we're a team in here. The other day, well, if one child is suffering in that classroom, the whole classroom is suffering. So how do all the children make it and not a child make it, or this percentage make it? So I think in the classrooms, I think in the workplaces, we've got to get back into teamwork, and to how do we together produce best for this company, for this corporation. So I think wherever we are in the political field, even, I mean, a mayor or a governor wants to create a teamwork in that body so they can get a vote through. So we have to begin to stress wherever we are the importance of connectedness. That's how we win, and the disconnected it is how we lose, and how people with power can come in and take advantage of it.
How do we push the concept and the importance of connectedness when so many people are tied to these devices, which almost force a degree of isolation? I'm particularly concerned about our youth and our children. What do we teach them? This is to anybody.
Children are going to understand. I mean, again, irrespective of the age, children have a very keen sense of understanding what is happening in the world around them. That they can experience stress, it lives in their body, even if they don't have the language to communicate it. And while stress and adversity is a normative life experience, we do need to worry about our youngest members of our community as well, because it has different effects on them. Chronic, persistent stress that is experienced without opportunities for repair is difficult. And this is where we think about, well, how do children develop? They develop in the context of relationships, and they need grown-ups to help them navigate times of uncertainty. They need grown-ups who can model how to be present, how to be connected. And we have seen this all along. We are talking about the impacts of trauma and stress, toxic stress. And we know that, and we see this in practice, we see this in research, children will struggle if they don't have an adult who can model how to cope. If they don't have adults who can help them feel connected to something bigger than any individual person or family. It is the grown-ups in the room that build that sense of community, that sense of identity. And so, yes, we have competition. Technology is something that can bring us together, but it too can be a force to divide. And so as we think about building resilience in these times of uncertainty, that we have to be very proactive and get away from our silos. I love the conversation of what can we do. It has organically happened. When communities are under stress, we find ways to connect. We find ways to unify under a shared mission, a shared value set. And that's something that needs to continue as we think about creating safety and security. As I said, that's a fundamental human need. We can't thrive, we can't feel well, we can't feel connected if we don't feel safe and secure. And so for us, I think about the grown-ups in the room, we've got to be intentional in our connections, being able to reach out across organizations and find synergy and opportunities to create intentional spaces to do this work that we are thinking of. If I can give a really brief example of the Migrant Mental Health Initiative, because we know that trauma it disrupts connection. We were walking into shelters that had hundreds, if not thousands of people at a given time during the new arrivals mission, in which we would ask residents, do you know the names of the people that you are sleeping next to in these huge facilities? And they would say no. And so part of our public health, mental health initiative was to create these small group discussions. We called them Café Comunidad Charlas, coffee and community small groups. And it was an opportunity, intentional opportunities, to bring people together who often don't talk to one another. And we talk about what mental health is and what it isn't. We give them information, and we end with hope. You know, again, trying to build that community, reminding people of their agency, modeling adaptive coping skills if they forgot it under the stress. And I remember in one session at one location, the facilitators, we were there and we had said, okay, everyone, we're going to end with hope and we're going to end with goals. And so tell us, what's something you want to do in the next 3 months, next month, something you want to achieve? And all the hands started to go up. And folks would shout out, I'm going to learn English. I'm going to learn how to ride the bus to Lincoln Park Zoo. You know, just simple things of wanting to be part of a community. And then one young woman raised her hand and said, I want to find love. And the whole room erupted. Hands were flying in the air saying, I'm single, pick me, I'm ready. And there was this moment of joy and laughter. And amidst all the hardship of being a new arrival, and again, not knowing if you have legal status here, not knowing what the future is going to be, in that moment, there was a shared humanity. That no matter what your circumstances, people have a right to want to fall in love, to be connected to others. And I think that would not have happened if we did not create intentional spaces for people to be together. So we need to do that. The leaders, the community members, we need to show up for our neighbors, give them the tools to understand the importance of what we're talking about, being able to say directly, we need to be connected with one another and not via text messages. And when we do that, we create these organic opportunities for joy and hope. I've held that story with me everywhere I go. It is a beautiful story about our shared humanity.
It is indeed a beautiful story. And we're getting close to the end of our panel. But I would like to, before we open it up for any questions that folks in our audience may have, I'd like to just kind of go by with each of you. And if you had, you know, a final message that you want to give to the audience about how can you support building resilience in your community? How can you support helping families, you know, deal with these challenges that they're facing now and will continue to face in the months to come? Let's start with you, Dr. Barnett.
Yeah, I'm still thinking about the story, the doctor, a lot. That is a
story.
beautiful story. I think if I had a final thought, trials, trauma, adversity, tribulations, you know, these are normal parts of life and they will always be with us. We will always experience them. That said, that means that the responsibility to support one another isn't necessarily on a behavioral health system, right? You know, the front line is family, it is community. And I think if we can frame that as better equipping families, better equipping communities, and with a safety net of social services as a backstop, I think we all would be the better for it.
Thank you, Dr. Barnett. Father Pfleger, what is your message to the audience? How can they be a part of the solution in building resilience and strengthening families in our communities?
I think with me, it's seeing each other as your brother and your sister, not your enemy, not your alien, not your stranger, recognizing that we are stronger together and we are all connected. That none of us were ever meant to be an island. We were meant to be a community of people in relationship with each other, and that together we can overcome whatever is facing us. You are not alone. Nobody is alone. And when we begin to see each other as valued and respect each other as human beings and as sisters and brothers, all of a sudden, not only will make other lives feel valued, but we're going to feel value to our own life when I'm connected to them.
And thank you, Pastor. And Dr. Hayato, you had such a beautiful story to end your remarks with. What would your final comments be to the audience about building resilience and strengthening families?
Call to action is to ensure that people understand, one, that we need to be seen, we need to be heard. And I encourage folks to have dialogue with communities that maybe you don't have the same value set, maybe share beliefs, open dialogue, because that becomes a pathway for connection. And if you've heard anything on this panel today, connection is where you build resilient communities. And so that's the call for everyone here today.
Thank you so much. It was a fabulous conversation. I think we have time for a couple of questions. If there's anything that we are seeing, let me check. In the question, I think there's a question for you, Dr. Barnett, about wanting to know where your quote came from. And if you can share that. And then Father Flager, there's a question about your food pantry distribution, and what day and time does that occur? Let's start with just those two.
Hey, sorry, it is scripture, and I will find the specific reference and put it in chat.
Thank
Okay.
you.
There you go.
Thank you, Reverend. Our food pantry is open Monday through Fridays from 9 until 3. And what we do at our pantry, rather than giving a bag of food, which oftentimes has some food in it people may not like or may not cook or may not eat, we have a store style where they get carts and they go through and they can take from the shelves. It's obviously a limited amount depending on how many in their family, but they pick the things they like that their family eats or that they cook. So there's a dignity and a respect about it. So when they leave in their plastic bags and they go back home, their child don't know if they've been a jewel or they've been to the food pantry, but we want them to feel respected in the process. But Monday through Friday from 9 until 3 on 79th and May.
Thank you. And it looks like Jessica Gimeno found your quote in 2 Corinthians.
Second Corinthians, yes. I'm sorry, I meant to say that. 2 Corinthians.
All right. I can't thank this panel enough. It was such an important conversation to have, and your voices were so important in learning from all of you how to move forward and how to teach our communities and families and our audience to move forward with trying to strengthen the resilience of all of the members of our community, no matter, as Father Flager said, your religion, your gender orientation, race, creed, whatever. So thank you so much. And I will turn things back over to Pete.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jones.
My pleasure.
Thanks, everybody. That was fascinating and educational and inspiring. Really grateful to our panelists for this really important conversation. We now have got about 5 minutes for us to stretch as you are able, get something to eat or drink, and get ready for our next 2 group sessions. I'd also like to encourage you to continue to think about your preference for our 3 breakout sessions later this morning, which will be focused on rural issues, children, or substance use disorders. A reminder that all of them will be available as recorded sessions afterwards. And you'll see a link in the chat right now to the recordings and the slides from day 1 of the forum. So you can find them there if you need something to do for the next 5 minutes. Otherwise, I will look forward to seeing you right back here. Thanks, everybody. Welcome back, everybody, as you are filtering in. Thanks for rejoining us. I'm excited about the rest of our morning. It's now my pleasure to kick off the second half of our event today by introducing our next speaker, Regina Kreider. Ms. Kreider is a senior policy analyst at Chapin Hall here in Chicago, and she's speaking to us today about her and her family's experience navigating multiple complex systems of care. Regina, welcome, and please go ahead.
Thank you so very much. I have to say that I am honored to be here on today. And that first session was exciting. And I am going to do my very best to stay on topic because I feel like I've been to church, right? And I enjoy a good church service. But I'm going to share my experiences as a mother, navigating systems for my daughter. So good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here with you all today to share not only my family story, but also to help reimagine what a crisis system can look like when families are seen, heard, and empowered. My name is Regina Kreider, and my journey into the children's behavioral health system began long before I ever carried a policy title or sat on a board. It started with one of the most critical and most important roles that I will ever hold, and that's that of being a mother. My daughter has significant mental health challenges, and she's on the spectrum. And I just solicit your encouragement and prayers today because we are in the middle of a crisis right now. So that's why the first section of this webinar has been so encouraging to me. But for many years, the system couldn't or wouldn't see her complexities. What began as concerns about school behavior and emotional dysregulation quickly spiraled into calls from the principal's office, emergency room visits, and moments of crisis that left us feeling overwhelmed and alone. And that's not even including the multiple hospitalizations. We were bounced from provider to provider, each assessing her through narrow lens, rarely coordinating, never fully understanding her or looking at her from a whole child perspective. No one told us in the beginning that we were navigating a system of care. It just felt like a system that we were surviving in. I became her case manager, her therapist, and her advocate, all while still trying to be her mom. What I learned painfully and repeatedly is that the system isn't always designed with families in mind. Too often, it's reactive rather than proactive, fragmented instead of coordinated, and very transactional when it should be relational. We were frequently handed cookie cutter crisis plans, templates that didn't reflect the realities of our situation or the services that we needed to be able to access in our community. The real issue was the lack of meaningful follow-up from those crisis providers. After a major crisis, there was often no coordinated effort to check in, no continuity of care, and no one to make sure that the plan was even working. We were left to pick up the pieces, and often the only plan in place was to wait for the very next emergency room visit. I also learned that parents are often treated as part of the problem instead of the solution. We were rarely viewed as experts in our own child's needs, and too often I was talked at, not with, and navigating that dynamic while managing my daughter's care felt very isolating and very dehumanizing. I learned that culturally responsive care and trauma-informed approaches are words that were often said, but they were not always put into practice. And I also learned that without intentional, funded pathways for family voice, policy designs and decisions got made without us. But here's the thing. Families do have solutions. We know what works. We just need to be invited into the process. not as an afterthought, but as an essential partner from the very start. In the middle of all of the chaos, I had to find my own sources of strength and learning. One of the most valuable tools I encountered was mental health first aid. That training gave me a language to talk about mental health and a framework to respond more confidently and effectively, not just for my daughter, but for others in my community. When we discovered mental health first aid, culturally, as a family of color, navigating the mental health system was very difficult for us. And my family, my immediate family, was our support system. And my parents were what they would call old school. And so a lot of times it was, well, if you would just do this and if you would just do that, then, it would make her straighten up. So I use mental health first aid as an opportunity to educate my entire family. So my mother, my father, my sister, my husband, we all attended mental health first aid training. And that gave us a context to be able to work from as a family. And it gave us a strong foundation so that when we talked about what was the challenges that we were dealing with my daughter, we were all speaking the same language. And that really helped us a lot in being able to navigate the system, but also for my family to be able to support us through that navigation of those systems. Another critical lifeline was my church. It was a place where I could cry, I could pray, and be reminded that I wasn't alone. Faith gave me the endurance to keep showing up, not just as a parent, but as an advocate. I am a pastor, and I remember the first hospitalization my daughter ever had. I was in the bed for almost a whole week, and it was leading up to Easter Sunday. And I remember standing in the pulpit, looking out into the congregation and realizing we could not possibly be the only family navigating and dealing with this situation. And so that put me on the fast track of also empowering and educating my congregation about the importance of resources and understanding children's behavioral health. Another resource that I turned to, which was a phenomenal online resource, was Child Mind Institute, which offered practical, evidence-based information that I could trust. Their articles helped me understand my daughter's needs more clearly and equipped me with tools I could take into IEP meetings, therapy sessions, and doctor's office visits. It was through Child Mind Institute that I was able to identify the appropriate assessment that my daughter needed in order to get the diagnosis that she needed to access the services that were really critical to her care. Up until she was 14 years old, we had only navigated the mental health system. We knew she had mental health challenges, but it was through learning about a psychological evaluation through Child Mind Institute that I learned about the psychological evaluation and how it was more comprehensive. When I got her psychological evaluation, that's when we discovered at the age of 14, after having navigated the system for over 4 years for her, that she was also on the spectrum. So that resource really empowered me to be able to identify what we needed in order to get down to the nuances of what some of her real challenges were. So these are just a few of the building blocks that helped me go from being overwhelmed to feeling empowered, not because the system suddenly changed, but because I started to find the tools and relationships that made me stronger and more informed. That journey led me to become an advocate, a trainer, and now a policy analyst focused on building the very system my daughter and so many other families deserve all along. Today, I work to center lived experience in our policy frameworks. I help elevate the voices of other parents and caregivers who navigate the trenches and come out on the other side with insight and wisdom that no textbook can teach you. In my work with the Children's Behavioral Health Transformation Initiative and with organizations like FRETLA and the Illinois Children's Healthcare Foundation, I've seen what's possible when we move beyond siloed crisis responses to a true continuum of care, where prevention, resilience, and recovery are just as prioritized as intervention. We are in a new era, and that requires a new kind of leadership, one that's bold enough to dismantle systems that don't serve families and build ones that do, one that's willing to elevate the expertise that comes from not just from degrees, but from lived experience. My family story is complex, but it's not unique. And that's why I share it, because the systems we build or fail to build shape real lives. And if we're truly committed to resilience and thriving, we must co-create with those who have lived the consequences of our policies. So let's stop asking, how do we fix families in crisis, and start asking, how do we fix the systems that have failed them in the first place? And I want to leave you with my life verse that's currently getting me through the crisis that we are facing right now. And it's Romans 8:28. And that scripture says, and we know that in all things, and like I tell my congregation, not some things, not a few things, not most things, but in all things, God, Elohim, the Almighty, works all things together for the good for those who love him and who have been called according to his purpose. So I know that what we are facing is not just a way of trying to harm us, but God is going to be glorified in it. And I know that he's going to bring us out of it. Thank you.
Regina, thanks so much. We're so grateful to you for sharing your family story and your own experience, faith, and hope. It's my hope that your remarks inspire all of us to reflect on our roles within these complex systems and how we can improve personally and contribute to system-level improvements. We intend that those conversations are a part of our next set of breakout sessions. And so I'd like to offer a few instructions for us as we get ready to move into those sessions. After I introduce the sessions and their speakers, you're going to see a box pop up on your screen asking you to choose one of the breakout sessions to join. When you click on that choice, you'll be taken automatically to your breakout session. As a reminder, if you feel like you can't choose between them, pick one with the assurance that you'll be able to watch recorded videos of the others two afterwards. As the breakout sessions wind down, you'll receive a reminder that your session will have 1 minute left. After that 1 minute is up, you'll be automatically brought back here into the main forum session for our final wrap up, including how to receive CEUs for today's sessions and the evaluation that's so important to us. If you have any problems during your time in the breakout session, please use the chat feature to contact one of us from the crisis hub, and especially Aaron Condon, who's our technical assistance lead. Now, to introduce our breakouts. Please be reminded that the full speaker bios are available at both the forum event website, which has already been put in the chat, and via the resources icon at the bottom of your screen. So first up, we've got a panel focused on rural issues, moderated by Dr. Sarah Scruggs, with panelists Shamikwa Williams. Secondly, we'll have a breakout focused on children, moderated by Dr. Dana Weiner, with panelists Christine Herman and Liz Manley. And third, we have a breakout focused on substance use disorders, moderated by Dr. Rafael Rivera, with panelists Dr. Nikki Castalla, Dr. Sarah Mesmer, Al Murphy, and Dr. Abigail Elms Patel. We'll now pop up the box on your screen for you to make your selection, and we'll see you back here about 11:45. Great. I want to thank everybody for for your participation in the breakout sessions. Our session on substance use was terrific. And I hope that you came away from those with some new ideas about how to implement personal and systems level change in your work. I'm going to wrap up. I'm not going to take 15 minutes to finish. I would like to take a moment to thank everybody, speakers, staff, you in the audience, for making this such a useful and meaningful event today. We've got one more left, the third of our 3 days. And if you haven't already registered, you can use the QR code on screen. It'll be a similar, exactly the same time, 9 to noon Central Time, since we are in Chicago. And next Wednesday on June 25th, our focus will be on how to generate hope for the future through collaboration and innovation. Themes that I think we really started touching on today. We really hope that you can join us. Also, really like to encourage you to help out with the evaluation. I guess that's the QR code. I'm sorry, the link for registration is there, but the QR code is for the evaluation. That evaluation is helpful both because we even made changes from day 1 to day 2 based on your feedback, but also the information on how to obtain CEUs follows the completion of the evaluation. And so that will be really important for those of you who are seeking continuing education credits. Finally, I just want to say on behalf of all of us at the Behavioral Health Crisis Hub, our partners at the Division for Mental Health at DHS, our great project manager, Sarah Rittner at SASU. Just really want to thank you for spending the morning with us. I found it personally very enlightening, and I'm guessing that you did too, because you're still here. We'll see you next Wednesday. Thanks, and take care, everybody.